The sower and the law of harvest, the miracle you're missing. Why the biggest change is invisible. They wanted spectacular miracles. But I taught them that the greatest miracle is in the silent growth of a seed in the heart. The sun beat down with the familiar, insistent heat of the Galilean summer. The crowds were immense, a restless living sea of humanity that followed me from village to village, from the shores of the lake to the dusty roads that climbed into the hills. I would stand on a hillside or sit in a small boat pulled just a few feet from the shore, and they would listen, their faces upturned, their eyes filled with a desperate hunger. It was a hunger not just for food, though many were poor and their bellies were empty. It was a hunger for the spectacular, for the divine made visible, for a world where their suffering was instantly, miraculously undone. They didn't want a process. They wanted a flash of lightning. They wanted a quick fix to their suffering, a moment that would change everything forever. My disciples too were caught up in this. They were proud of the miracles, for they were proof that the kingdom was not just a promise but a present reality. They loved to tell the stories, their voices filled with awe, their faces glowing with a reflected glory. They saw the kingdom in the thunder of a healed man's footsteps, in the tears of a mother whose child I had brought back from death. They saw the kingdom in the loaves and the fishes, the spectacular abundance that left them with baskets full of leftovers. They truly believed the louder the miracle, the closer we were to victory. They believed the kingdom would come with a flash of light, with a trumpet blast, with a public and undeniable display of power that would change the world in a single, breathtaking instant. This was their ordinary life, a life of walking with a God who made the impossible ordinary and the mundane divine. They were in awe of the spectacle, and they were eager for the next sign, the next wonder that would prove once and for all that their king had come. They were blinded by the show, and they were completely missing the foundation. They saw the world as a place of brokenness, and they looked to me to mend it with a single powerful command, with a miracle that would silence the doubters and astonish the faithful. Their understanding was simple, direct, and focused on the undeniable, the visible, the loud. The crack began subtly, almost imperceptibly, on a day much like any other. The crowds were gathered, their anticipation a tangible force in the hot air. They were waiting for a miracle, perhaps a withered hand to be made whole, or a man born blind to see the light of day. But on that day I did not heal or cast out a demon. I began to speak in a parable. I told them a story about a farmer, a sower of seeds. I spoke of the seeds falling on the path, on rocky ground among thorns, and finally on good soil. The story was simple, rooted in the everyday reality of their lives. A farmer, a field, a seed. But the crowd's murmurs of anticipation shifted to murmurs of confusion. Their faces, once filled with expectation, now wore expressions of puzzlement. They came for a demonstration of power, and I gave them a puzzle to solve. I could feel the shift in the spiritual atmosphere. The air, which had been thick with hunger for the spectacular, was now thick with a quiet, uncomfortable dissonance. A parable was not a miracle. It did not instantly heal a sickness or fill an empty stomach. It required thought, contemplation, and a deeper kind of listening. Their attention, so easily captured by the visible, was now fading with every word. I saw some in the crowd begin to turn away, their shoulders slumping in disappointment. They had come for bread, and I had given them a story. They had come for a show, and I had given them a lesson. My disciples too were confused. I saw their glances exchanged, their eyebrows furrowed in a quiet question. Why speak in riddles? Why not just say it plainly? The visible reality of the kingdom was so powerful. Why not lead with that? I was telling them a truth they weren't yet prepared to hear. The crack was not a sudden chasm, but a slow, widening gap between what they expected and what I was offering. They were accustomed to seeing the fruit of my ministry immediately. A healing, a deliverance, a meal. But the parable I was speaking of was about a slow, hidden process, a miracle that would happen far from the public eye, in the quiet, unseen depths of a person's heart. They were used to seeing the fruit on the vine, but I was asking them to understand the process of the root, to appreciate the silent, laborious work that happened beneath the ground. The crack was in the foundation of their understanding, a small but growing divide between the glory of the spectacle and the quiet power of a simple spoken word. The biggest miracle was happening, and they didn't even realize it. The confusion in the crowd was not a passing thing. It grew, festering into an open frustration. They wanted to know why. Why speak in parables? Why tell stories that were so simple on the surface yet so difficult to understand on a deeper level? The questions came not just in whispers but in direct, challenging voices. "What does this parable mean?" they demanded. Some walked away, their disappointment a palpable presence in the air. The crowd was thinning, and those who remained were no longer looking for a miracle with eager anticipation, but with a new kind of scrutiny, a new kind of doubt. The spectacle had ended, and the hard work of understanding had begun, and many were not willing to do it. The disciples, too, were at their breaking point. They were wrestling with a question that had no easy answer. After the crowds had dispersed, they came to me, their faces a mix of confusion, frustration, and a quiet loyalty. They loved me, they trusted me, but they did not understand. They had left everything to follow me, and they were just as invested as the crowds in the visible public success of my ministry. The parables felt like a risk, a barrier between me and the people who so desperately needed to hear my words. "Why do you speak to them in parables?" they asked, their voices low and earnest. It was the most honest question they had asked me so far. It was a question born not of a lack of faith, but of a deep, honest confusion. They had seen my power, they had witnessed my glory, and they could not reconcile it with this seemingly obscure, roundabout way of teaching. The breaking point was not a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, honest question that laid bare the core of their misunderstanding. They saw the kingdom as an open book, a truth to be proclaimed from the rooftops, a light that should be held up for all to see. But I was teaching them that some truths must be discovered, not just received. They did not yet understand that the truths of the kingdom were not a public spectacle, but a private, internal revelation. They were still learning to differentiate between the miraculous and the divine, between a healing and a transformation. The breaking point was the moment when their understanding was stretched to its limit, when the comfortable familiarity of our shared journey gave way to the painful, necessary work of truly seeing. I looked at my disciples, at their earnest faces, their questioning eyes, and my heart was filled with a deep and tender love for them. They had walked away from everything for me, and they deserved to understand. So I shifted from speaking to the crowds to speaking to them, a deeper truth for those who had chosen to walk this path with me. "The knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them," I said. The words were a quiet, powerful promise. I then took the time to explain the parable, to unpack the meaning of each type of soil. The path where the word is stolen, the rocky ground where the word takes root but withers away, the thorns where the word is choked out by the cares of this world, and finally the good soil, where the word takes root and bears a harvest of 30, 60, and 100-fold. The shift was not in the words themselves, but in their context. The disciples were no longer just hearing a story. They were receiving a divine key, a sacred revelation. The light came on in their hearts, and the mystery began to unravel. They began to understand that the miracle was not in the sower or in the seed, but in the soil, in the receptive heart of the listener. They began to see that the kingdom was not a sudden, loud event, but a silent, hidden work. The healing of a body was a beautiful thing, but the slow, patient work of a seed taking root in a heart and transforming it from rocky ground to fertile soil was the truest miracle. They were learning a new kind of power, the power of patience. The shift was in their understanding of success. It was no longer about the number of people who came to see a miracle, but about the number of hearts that were prepared to receive the word. It was a shift from the exterior to the interior, from the immediate to the eternal. They began to see the purpose in every single quiet conversation. They saw that their ministry was not a spectacle to be performed, but a seed to be sown. They were no longer showmen, but humble farmers of the soul. The word parable no longer meant riddle, but a key to the kingdom. The shift was complete and profound, a new understanding that would forever change the way they saw their purpose. They were no longer looking for instant fruit, but for the silent, patient, and glorious work of a seed taking root. The purpose of the parable was to teach them a fundamental truth about the kingdom of God. That true, lasting transformation is a quiet, internal process. The spectacular miracles were a sign, a hook to draw the crowds away, to show them a glimpse of my authority. But they were not the goal. The goal was the silent work of the seed in the heart. The parable taught them that the word I was speaking was not a magic formula, but a living seed, and that the harvest was dependent not just on the seed, but on the condition of the soil. It was a truth that was both liberating and humbling. It was liberating because it meant that the success of their ministry was not dependent on their own charisma or power, but on the simple act of sowing the seed. They did not need to make the seed grow. They just needed to plant it. It was a relief to understand that they didn't have to force a miracle. It was humbling because it put the focus back on the heart of the listener. It was a call to a deeper kind of ministry, one that was not about a show but about the hard, quiet work of cultivating hearts, of preparing the soil, of making a way for the word to take root. The parable was also a message about patience. A seed does not grow into a tree overnight. A harvest does not appear in a single day. The kingdom of God, I was teaching them, would not come with a single dramatic event, but with a slow, patient, and persistent work in the hearts of men and women. It was a lesson in the power of invisible progress. It was a lesson in the power of small things, a single seed, a single word, a single act of faith. These were the things that would build the kingdom, not the spectacular events that captured the crowds for a single day. The purpose of the parable was to reframe their understanding of ministry, to shift their focus from the grand and the glorious to the small and the sacred. They were being equipped to build a kingdom that would last. It was a call to a life of quiet faithfulness, a life of trusting in a work that was beyond their own ability to see or to understand. It was a call to a life that was not about results but about the process, a life that was not about the show but about the seed. The impact of the parable was profound and lasting. The disciples, who had once been so focused on the visible, now understood the power of the unseen. They had learned to see the world not as a place of spectacular miracles but as a field, a place of potential, a place where the word could be sown and a harvest could be reaped. They had learned that the greatest miracle was not a storm calmed or a body healed, but the silent, transformative work of a seed taking root in a person's heart. The parable had given them a new lens through which to see their mission. They no longer measured their success by the number of followers they had, but by the depth of the faith they had helped to cultivate. They were no longer chasing a crowd but a harvest. In the years to come, after I had ascended to the Father, they would carry this lesson with them. When the crowds were small, when their words seemed to fall on deaf ears, when the persecution was fierce and the way was hard, they would remember the parable of the sower. They would remember that their job was not to ensure the harvest, but simply to sow the seed. This one lesson would become their anchor in the face of doubt. They would remember that the work of the kingdom was not a public spectacle, but a quiet, patient, and persistent work of grace in the hearts of men and women. The parable had given them an abiding hope, a spiritual resilience that would carry them through the most difficult of times. They discovered that true power is found in faithfulness, not fame. They had come to understand that the greatest miracle was not in a flash of light, but in the silent, miraculous work of a seed taking root in the good soil of a prepared heart. And for all eternity they would be a testament to the truth that a life of selfless service is a life that truly lasts. My child, I see you. I see your eyes, and in them I see a heart that yearns for a miracle, a grand, undeniable sign that will change everything in an instant. You are not alone in this. My disciples yearned for the same spectacular display of power. But I tell you now, the greatest work of my kingdom is not a flash of light, but a silent seed. The miracles you seek are meant to point you to a deeper, more profound truth. The real miracle happens in the quiet, unseen space of your heart. You may have felt frustration when a prayer wasn't answered with immediate public fanfare. Perhaps you felt that quiet disappointment when the message wasn't a dramatic sermon, but a simple story about a farmer. That feeling of confusion is the beginning of wisdom. It's the crack in your understanding that allows a new, deeper light to enter. The simple truths I offer are not puzzles to confuse you, but keys to unlock a greater, more sustainable purpose. This is where I invite you to a different kind of understanding, a quiet revolution from the inside out. The secret is in the soil of your own heart. Is it hard ground, where the word cannot take root? Or is it good soil, ready to receive and grow? My word is a living seed, and the true miracle is watching it quietly transform you from the inside out. If this message has planted even a tiny seed of hope within you today, I ask you to like this message, subscribe to this channel, and share it with others. By doing so, you are not just supporting this work. You are becoming a sower yourself, planting seeds for a harvest that will bless countless others. Your true purpose is not found in performing miracles, but in the faithful act of sowing. You don't need to force the harvest. You only need to prepare the soil and trust the process. The work of my kingdom is built on millions of small unseen acts of love and faith. It is not about a grand gesture, but about the quiet dignity of a life lived with integrity. Be patient with yourself and with the world around you. The most lasting changes are the ones that take a lifetime to grow. This truth is meant to be your anchor in the storms of life. When the world seems loud and overwhelming and your own faith feels small, remember the sower. Your job is not to control the outcome, but to remain faithful to the process. This understanding will give you a spiritual resilience that nothing can shake. The world may measure success by spectacle and speed, but I measure it by the silent, persistent work of grace. You will find abiding hope in the law of the harvest. So go forth and be a sower of good seeds in your family, your community, and your own soul. You are a vessel for the greatest miracle of all, the quiet growth of a living, transformative faith. Do not underestimate the power of your unseen work, for in the end, it is not the loudness of your deeds but the depth of your heart's soil that will define your eternity. Know that you are deeply loved, and that your quiet faithfulness is more powerful than you could ever imagine.